Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. By far, the biggest storyline for this Miami Hurricanes program going into 2025 is, hey, how much better does this defense get in 2025 immediately under Corey Hetherman? I think it's funny because you listen to how a lot of the national media talks about this Miami Hurricanes football team. It goes to, hey, how do you replace Cam Ward? Is Carson Beck good enough going into 2025? I've been very vocal since the winter and throughout the spring. I look at this Miami Hurricanes offense and say, yeah, it might not be as high flying as it was with Cam Ward in 2024. It might have the prolific passing attack that we saw in the 2024 year. I know they can run the football. I know Carson Beck's very good working off play action. If you get a healthy Carson Beck, of which it sounds like we have a healthy Carson Beck going into the summer, this Miami Hurricanes offense is comfortably going to be good enough to compete at the highest level of the sport. The question in terms of, hey, is Miami just a playoff caliber team, or are they a team that can compete for a national championship? That question lies with, hey, how much better does this defense get immediately in 2025? And I think what's really unique about this conversation is, look, in this era of college football, you have the ability to turn around a defense in one offseason. And Mario Cristobal has taken the steps to do so, right? Not only hiring Corey Hetherman, and Corey Hetherman gets a lot of the national media spotlight, and rightfully so. He's the defensive coordinator. A lot of resources getting invested to bring in Coach Etheridge, Coach Will Harris. I mean, in my opinion, two of the best in the game coaching the back end of defenses. You've completely revamped the coaching staff, but at the same time, you were able to completely revamp the personnel as well. I look at the roster that's in front of us and say, yeah, this team is good enough to be a top 30 defense in the country immediately in 2025. Now, certain things need to get fixed, certain things need to come together, but I think this team is comfortably good enough in terms of talent and coaching to make it happen in 2025. Now, what needs to happen, what needs to get fixed, that's the conversation I want to get into. And it's a really interesting conversation because for the first time, really, Mario Cristobal sat down with Josh Pate. And I'm sure many of y'all have listened to this interview at this point. I was about as open and as candid as you'll get Mario Cristobal in terms of talking about the struggles that this defense went through in the 2024 year. I want to start with what Mario Cristobal talked about, what went wrong, why he's so high, why he chose Corey Hetherman as the guy going into 2025, and hey, what makes us believe that this defense can take not only a step, but a significant step in the right direction going into 2025. Fired up to get into it. Before we do it, as always, to the Miami Hurricane fans, y'all let it fly in the comment section. Whether it's reasons to believe, whether it's the expectation you have for Corey Hetherman, I'm fired up to hear from y'all. And to the Miami Hurricane fans who've been rocking with the fellas for a while, buckle in. We are entering official visit season. We got a lot to talk about on the recruiting trail as well. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into it. Now, what I want to start with was, what did Mario Cristobal talk about? What went wrong with this team in 2024? And I think the frustrating part about it is go back to week one in Gainesville. That defense playing to its potential, that looked like a defense that was going to be a top 20 unit in the country after that week one game against Florida. Dominated in the front seven, not a lot of coverage bust in the back end, didn't really give up a lot of big plays. That was a defensive performance that told us, that showed us that this Miami Hurricanes defense was good enough on paper. It just kind of fell apart. Now, what fell apart? Mario Cristobal first talked about some injuries, which, look, I get, and that's part of the sport. I don't think anybody denies that. My issue with that, and what I'm so happy Mario Cristobal addressed here, was if you're a team like Miami, you shouldn't have one or two injuries derail a defense like the injuries did in the 2024 year. Like, we knew Miami was thin in the secondary. They lose a guy like Damari Brown, have a couple other guys get banged up, and all of a sudden this thing falls off a cliff. When you're Miami, you have to have the adequate depth. When you're a program like Miami that has goals of winning a national championship, you have to be a deep enough team to go play 14, 15, 16 games, because that's what it takes to go win national championships in this era of college football. Miami just wasn't there yet. And with all the injuries kind of coming along, they were kind of forced to play some guys that probably weren't ready. And the biggest thing Mario Cristobal talked about was we didn't do the simple stuff right. It wasn't about the scheme. It wasn't about playing man coverage or playing zone coverage or bringing 4-man blitzes or bringing 5-man blitzes or rushing 3, dropping 8. All of that fancy football lingo, that didn't matter as much as we were not aligned the right way. We were not executing our assignments the right way. Those were the two things that Mario Cristobal talked about: alignment and assignment. When you are confused on defense and you ain't playing fast and physical, bad things happen. And that's kind of what Mario Cristobal talked about. And I think the biggest change and the thing that kind of what Mario Cristobal sounded like pushed him to go out and get Corey Hetherman is we're going to do the simple stuff the right way. And that kind of gets into how it gets fixed. Going back to our take that is this team's good enough on defense. Like the personnel, the depth chart that we're looking at is good enough to be, I don't know if it's going to be a top 5, top 10 defense in the country, but we know it's good enough to be top 30, top 20. And that's what we're looking for. Hell, you give Miami a top 30 defense in the country last year in November, you're probably talking about a deep run in the playoffs, if not competing for a national championship. The biggest thing that fires me up about what Mario Cristobal is talking about with Corey Hetherman is we are getting back to the simple stuff. And that doesn't mean we're going to be really vanilla and not mix up our coverage packages and not send pressure when we want to. But we're going to make sure our guys know what they're doing right now and they're playing fast and physical. This is many of y'all know I'm a Wake Forest alum, and y'all know what Wake Forest football is about. We don't have the Jimmies and Joes like Miami does. So how does Wake Forest have to win as a football team often? They got to out scheme you. If you're Miami, especially on defense, when you have guys who are NFL talented at all 3 levels, go rely on your best football players to go win you football games. Put them in the best spots. Make things easy for them. Let them go dominate. You don't have to out scheme the opponents. You just got to go out play them. That's what fires me up the most. And then you look at this defense as a whole and kind of what the makings are. One of the big problems that I saw was that I had felt like the defensive line late in the season underperformed. Go back to that week 1 game against Florida. That would have had 3 sacks and 8 tackles for a loss. That was a defense. That's a good Florida offensive line. That was a Florida offensive line that played some pretty dang good football at times in the 2024 year. Miami whooped tail up front. And then you go to that game against Syracuse or the game against Iowa State in the bowl game and say, this defensive line is not nearly as disruptive, was not creating as many negative plays, was not creating as many turnovers. It looked easy for the quarterback in the pocket. That's where this thing starts. I think there's a lot of conversation that goes to the secondary, and we'll get to the secondary in just a second. To me, if this Miami Hurricanes defense takes that step, it starts with maximizing what you can be up front. Mario Cristobal's poured a lot of time and resources into getting those kind of bodies up front. Ruben Bain, Justin Scott, Armando Blunt, Hayden Lowe, Marquise Lightfoot. I mean, the list goes on and on with the blue chip talent. We know these guys are capable. Now they got to go put it on the field. I expect this Miami Hurricanes defense to be a unit that should be at least top 30 in sack percentage in the 2025 year. Then you go to the secondary. The thing that stands out to me the most about the secondary is the depth. Mario Cristobal talked about, hey, when Damari Brown went down, we didn't have guys that we trusted. You can't be in that position, especially when you want to go out and compete for an ACC championship and the national championship. Not only do you have the top end talent, Xavier Lucas, a guy that I expect to be a first-round NFL draft pick in 24 months. A guy like OJ Frederick that maybe you can say the same thing about. Zachariah Poise is an NFL dude. The depth is what stands out. You lose a guy like Damari Brown to injury. Instead of playing someone you don't trust to go out and play, you got a guy in Keontae Scott who's played a ton of nickel cornerback in the SEC. OJ Frederick has to miss a game. You got a guy like Charles Bradley who was all Big Ten last year at Michigan State. Ethan O'Connor potentially. I look at the depth of this football team, specifically in the secondary, and say, you're talented, you're deep enough, you got 2 really good coaches, in my opinion, and Zach Etheridge and Will Harris. You fix the personnel, you fix the coaching staff. The last question that remains for me about this Miami Hurricanes defense is, are we deep enough in the middle of the defensive line? David Blade, Justin Scott, Ahmad Moten. three guys that I think we trust a lot. Outside of that, Artavius Jones, Dante Simpson are probably the only other two that we see playing significant snaps. What happens if Justin Scott has to miss a game or two? Or what happens if Ahmad Moten has to miss a game or two? Or just in general, you're getting into the fourth quarter and you want to rotate guys to be fresh. And Notre Dame's going to run the football at you 40, 50 times a game. Are we holding up in the fourth quarter against a team that wants to run right into our faces? That's the last question mark remaining. And I'm kind of interested to hear as we go into fall camp, like, are we giving Akeem Mesidor opportunities to work inside? Potentially a guy like Ruben Bain, because that might be what it needs to look like, especially in the pass rushing downs, to maybe address the lack of depth that we have in the middle of the defensive line. I think it's very clear this team's good enough from a talent standpoint. This is not like Corey Hetherman's coming in to a unit that doesn't have dudes. They have the dudes. You go out and play fast and physical and just simplify this thing and get everyone playing on the same page. I don't think it's crazy. Again, it reminds me of the same conversation that people had about USC last year. USC, they're just, how are they going to take that big of a step year one with Dan Lynn? Well, they did. And I would argue that Miami did more in the portal this year than USC did last year. So I think you got a new DC coming in with a brand new coaching staff with better players. I don't think it's crazy to talk about this team being a top 30, top 20 defense in the country. And if you get that, you're going to be competing at the highest level of this sport. Now, is it going to be good enough to win a national championship? We'll see. But at least you're putting yourself in a spot where you can win big time football games. Where last year, because of this defense just falling apart, it was really hard to consistently win those things down the stretch. We'll close it out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. Again, if y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Please let it fly in the comment section in terms of expectations that you have year one. We'll talk plenty about it as we roll into fall camp, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.